Topics Chapter 10 Part 4. Views of Civil Service Reform. Tilden nominated for the presidency. Senator Wallace, chairman of the Pennsylvania delegation, which had recommended General Winfield Scott Hancock, a citizen of their own state, as their candidate for the presidency, then moved that the nomination of Mr. Tilden be made unanimous, observing that, as the second state of the Union, although we would have preferred one born on our own soil, still she will not slacken one nerve nor weaken one effort for the success of the nominee of this convention. And when the Ides of November come, we feel assured that victory will crown our efforts. Or, Indiana seconded Pennsylvania's motion and it was adopted, though the vote of Pennsylvania, when the Ides of November came, failed to increase Senator Wallace's fame as a prophet. Mr. Hendricks, who was nominated for vice president, was Mr. Tilden's only formidable rival. He was a man of considerable talent. He had made a creditable record as a political leader in Indiana, and might have been a statesman if he had been less of a demagogue. He was more or less infected with all the political heresies of the period and of the section in which he resided. Instead of leading his people, he was ready to yield to any clamor and foster any delusion that promised him votes. Indiana was a pivotal state. Its vote might, and it seemed not improbable then that it would, decide the fate of the candidates. His friends assumed, not without justice probably, that he would poll a larger vote in Indiana than any other person that could be nominated. Presuming upon his importance to the party, he aspired to the place at the head of the ticket. He even carried his presumption so far as to have it given out that he would accept no other. It was unfortunate that he did not adhere to this purpose, if he seriously entertained it. It did not quench, but it greatly impaired, the enthusiasm inspired by the prompt and almost unanimous nomination of Mr. Tilden. It detached from the support of the ticket a very considerable number of prominent Republicans, who had lost confidence in the leaders of their own party and inclined to support Mr. Tilden for the presidency, but who were not willing to expose the country to the risks of a government of which, in case of Mr. Tilden's demise, and his health was far from robust, Mr. Hendricks would be the head. "I cannot vote for Hendricks," was the excuse which multitudes of this class gave for going back from following Tilden, and which many journals that had cordially commended and defended him while governor assigned for opposing his election as president. Even such a decided and uncompromising party organ as the New York Tribune had no objection to the ticket, except Hendricks in the platform, but chiefly Hendricks. They forced it reluctantly into the support of Hayes. That the platform did not suit the Tribune nor any other thick and thin party paper of the Republican denomination is not surprising, for it was the most scathing and unanswerable indictment of the administration, then drawing to its close, that the English alphabet could be made to clothe. It was by far the most instructive, the most interesting, and on the whole the most important document which has ever issued from any nominating convention in this country. It deserves and will reward the careful study of any future historian who may attempt to tell the story of that portion of our national life that embraced the presidency of General Grant. Its keynote was reform, and expressed Mr. Tilden's view of the duty which an election to the presidency would impose upon him and the work he hoped to accomplish. If not entirely in his own language, it is entitled to be regarded as a faithful forecast of the sort of administration he would have given the country had its choice of candidates been respected. Mr. Tilden received the news of his nomination as though he had long expected nothing else, for it did not in the least divert him from employments than which nothing could be more remote from political conventions or presidential preoccupations. It chanced that James C. Carter, Esq., of the New York Bar, was with the governor in consultation in reference to a suit, to which the latter was a party, when the nomination was made, and Mr. Carter has given the following graphic account of the governor's bearing during that momentous day. In the performance of a professional service for him while he was governor, in connection with a lawsuit to which he was a party, it became necessary that I should tarry several days at his house in Albany in order to secure his attention during the intervals between his official duties. It was while the Street Louis Convention was in session at which he was nominated for the presidency. One would suppose that under such circumstances he could have given his mind to little else than the business in which his personal fortunes were so deeply concerned. But he could not have devoted himself more ardently to recalling and arranging the facts of the complicated transactions out of which this lawsuit grew than he did on the very day when he was nominated. Late in the afternoon of that day, after protracted work, he took me upon a long drive with him. In the course of it he did not even allude to the convention, or its doings, although a flight of telegrams had been coming to him. His conversation, animated and incessant, was upon false policies in government, the mischiefs and burdens of over-expenditure, the true principles of taxation, the errors of protective tariffs, etc. One could see that the mere matter of holding the presidential office was little to him, but that the chance of laying his reforming hand upon the multitude of abuses with which, as he supposed, the whole administration of the general government was infested, aroused his enthusiasm, as the prospect of a season of sport would that of a boy. Becoming animated with his theme, eloquent and intense in his language, he failed in attention to the high-spirited horse he was driving, and I was in constant fear of a catastrophe. Indeed, on a similar drive the succeeding day we met with one from the same cause. The injury was inflicted instead of received, and cost the governor several $1,000s by way of damages. When, on our return, on the day first mentioned, we were near home, I observed to him that he would perhaps find at the house a telegram announcing his nomination. "No," said he, unconcernedly, "not until about 9:30. It came not many moments from that time. Impressed upon this occasion with his profound and extensive knowledge of everything relating to the science of government, and thinking his views not substantially at variance with those held by leading Republicans, for at that time the Republican party had not become committed to its present dogmas on the subject of protective tariffs, I ventured to express to him the surprise I felt that he had not allied himself to that party, saying that it seemed to me that, considering the greatly superior number of men of education and public spirit to be found in its ranks, he could much more easily procure a general acceptance of his opinions by acting in alliance with them. He answered that he thought that I was mistaken, that, while it was true that a large majority of men of culture, wealth, and force were to be found in the Republican Party, the trouble was that, to use his own language, it was a party of self-seekers. He explained that he did not mean this in any offensive sense, that what he meant was that the controlling men of that party were men of large pecuniary interests, seeking to build up fortunes and families, that these personal interests were so large as necessarily to engross their thoughts and control their opinions, leading them to use their powerful influence so as to shape the legislation of the country in a form which would favor those interests, that it was difficult to lead such men along the pathway of those fundamental principles of democratic government by which alone equal justice could be done to the masses of men, that the Democratic Party held within its ranks a far less number of men of this description, not enough to control its action, and consequently, the opinions of its great masses could be more easily shaped and molded by the mere force of ideas, that this was the distinction between the former Democratic and Whig parties, and that the Republican Party would, as the patriotic inspirations caught from the opposition to slavery and the defense of the Union died away, become the mere successor to the spirit and policy of the Whig Party. These observations, adds Mr. Carter, as applied to the two present parties of the country, would not, probably, be accepted without dissent, but they intimate a most important truth, that is, that when a man comes to be the possessor of large property interests, these will, whatever may be his character, control his opinions in relation to any question affecting them. The great railroad interests of the country are conducted by men, I suppose, of as honorable character as can be found in any walk of life. But they will not, in the face of threatened disaster, keep the agreements they make with each other. They do not hesitate, when these interests are threatened by adverse legislation, to defend them by secret arts and practices kept secret because they could not be avowed without a blush. Mr. J. Good, in some testimony drawn from him by a legislative committee, expressed the truth by saying that he was sometimes a Democrat and sometimes a Republican, but always a Neary man. It must be admitted that the occasions are often fearfully trying. They sometimes impose a test which human nature is ill-fitted to bear. The individual who is subjected to them is called upon to defend, not only his own property, but that of others. A man may surrender his own interests, but what account is he to give of himself when he surrenders interests which have been entrusted to him for defense? In the evening of the day of Mr. Tilden's nomination, the citizens of Albany flocked to the Executive Mansion, escorted by the Jackson Corps, to offer their congratulations and a serenade. In the course of it he stepped out upon the porch and said, "I cordially thank you for this manifestation of your kindness. I do not forget that last year you enrolled me among you as an honorary member. I regard with satisfaction and pride your excellent discipline and training as a military body. I recognize in you many representatives of the workingmen of Albany, and when I say workingmen, I don't forget that in our country the number who live on the income of what they have accumulated or inherited is extremely small, and that nearly every citizen of our vast republic lives on the product of his daily toil. In America we are nearly all workingmen, and therefore the interest and prosperity of that class may almost be said to be the interest and prosperity of the country." Applause. In no country which the sun ever shone on has had so many blessings as our own, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and from the Great Lakes of the North to the Gulf of Mexico, with a genial climate and fertile soils, with every natural and artificial facility for travel and transportation, with all the arts and industries of an old civilization, planting and flourishing amid the boundless natural wealth of a virgin continent. We ought to be today the most prosperous, though what is our actual condition? All business depressed, every industry languishing, labor without employment, most happy and contented people in the world. And the wolf at the door of nearly every home in the land, gaunt and hungry. More applause. What is the matter? We know that for the last 11 years, since the peace, the earnings of labor and the income of capital have been consumed or wasted in government expenditures. The taxes drawn from the people of the United States have been larger than the entire net savings of the whole 44 millions. Taxes have increased within a short period fourfold, and the influence is felt in every business and every industry, and in every home throughout our broad land. What next do we find? In the public administration everywhere abuses, peculations, frauds, and corruption, till we are almost becoming ashamed of the institutions of our country, and instead of holding them up as examples for the imitation of the oppressed people of other countries, we are confessing them as a scandal in the eyes of mankind. What else do we find? We find that the office-holding class have become so numerous, powerful, and unscrupulous, that they assume to control the elections, and, if the people are indifferent, or at all equally divided, are able to exert a corrupt influence, sufficient to perpetuate their own power. At least we are reaching the worst condition of the countries of the Old World. The government no longer exists for the people. The people exist for the government. Our centennial products are the evils, license, and wrongs to escape which our ancestors abandoned their homes in the Old World and planted themselves in a wilderness. Now, I ask, what is the remedy for these public evils, for this private distress, for this disorder in business which carries suffering into every household? A voice in the crowd shouts the election of Tilden. Applause. Tilden replies it is comprised in one word: reform. The reform of the public administration. The crowd cheers. Tilden explains upon this subject there is a difference of opinion. One class says, elect the nominees of the party under which these evils have grown up, by means of the office-holding class, which is interested in perpetuating these abuses and wrongs. That is one opinion. There is another opinion, and that opinion demands a change of men for the sake of reform in the administration. Fellow citizens, I do not intend to argue the question. I intend to simply state it, and leave it to your judgment, and to the judgment of the people. I am heartily with you in sympathy and action. I am happy to meet you tonight. I trust I shall have an opportunity of seeing you hereafter again. Thanking you for your kind attention, I bid you good evening. The nomination was popular with the country and had few if any reconcilable enemies except among the predatory class, who, if he should be elected, were sure to be brought to judgment. There was a universal feeling that, of all our public men, he was the only one who had given unequivocal evidence of the ability and the disposition to cope with the enemies of our national household. Party ties and the nomination of Hendricks prevented a more general public expression of this feeling on the part of the Republican press, though they did not suppress ample recognition of the peculiar significance of his nomination. The committee appointed by the convention to notify Governor Tilden of his nomination waited upon him at his residence in Gramercy Park on the 11th of July for that purpose. In his reply, the governor said he should at his early convenience send the committee a formal acceptance of the nomination, but, without anticipating any topic that might be appropriate to that communication, permitted himself to say that his nomination was not a mere personal preference between citizens and statesmen, who might very well have been chosen for so distinguished an honor and for so august a duty, but rather a declaration of the convention in favor of administrative reform with which events had associated him in the public mind. He then added with singular felicity, I am not without experience of the difficulty of the labor of effecting administrative reform when it requires a revolution in politics and in measures long established in government. If I were to judge by the year and a half, during which I have been in the state government, I should say that the routine duties of the trust I have had imposed upon me are a small burden compared with that created by the attempt to change the practice of the government of which I have been the executive head. Especially is this so where the reform is to be worked out with more or less cooperation of public officers who either have been tainted with the evils to be redressed, or who have been incapacitated by the habit of tolerating the wrongs to be corrected, and to which they have been consenting witnesses. Therefore, if your choice should be ratified by the people at the election, I should enter upon the great duties which would be assigned to me, not as a holiday recreation, but very much in that spirit of consecration in which a soldier enters battle. In consequence of the lingering illness of his elder brother, which proved fatal, and the pressure of official duties, the governor's letter formally accepting his nomination for the presidency did not appear until the 31st of July. With the views he saw fit to set forth in it, the reader is already familiar. It concluded as follows. Educated in the belief that it is the first duty of a citizen of the Republic to take his fair allotment of care and trouble in public affairs, I have, for 40 years, as a private citizen, fulfilled that duty. Though occupied in an unusual degree during all that period with the concerns of government, I have never acquired the habit of official life. When, a year and a half ago, I entered upon my present trust, it was in order to consummate reforms to which I had already devoted several of the best years of my life. Knowing as I do, therefore, from fresh experience, how great the difference is between gliding through an official routine and working out a reform of systems and policies, it is impossible for me to contemplate what needs to be done in the federal administration without an anxious sense of the difficulties of the undertaking. If summoned by the suffrages of my countrymen to attempt this work, I shall endeavor, with God's help, to be the efficient instrument of their will. End of Chapter 10. Jan Volume 1 of The Life of Samuel J. Tilden. 2 appendices will be added. Appendix: Origin of the Tweed Ring. Memorandum of Charles O'Connor, Court of Appeals, Stephen Clark V, the Mayor, etc., of New York. Appendix B: The Democratic Platform in 1876 will be added in an additional audio book for easier references. End comment. Hope you've enjoyed Volume 1. If so, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for this channel. The Life of Samuel J. Tilden Volume 2 will be posted with a lighter green cover so viewers can tell the difference between the 2 volumes. Producer Nikki Oldacre, Showbiz East Productions. All rights reserved. No part of these audiobooks may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system or transmitted in any form, or by any means, electronic, mechanical, recorded, photocopied, or otherwise without prior permission of the copyright owner, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review.